Smoov and curly on video.
Hey, Charles, welcome back.
Hi, Michael. Thanks
Hey.
for having me.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's our show, so it wouldn't make sense not to invite you.
I don't know, man. I assume that you go off and you have other shows without me.
I do have another show without you, but
Mhm.
just the one, and it's a special case. But everything else I tried to do specifically with you.
Okay, I will remember that.
You write articles and stuff without me, and plus, like, you go to Congress.
Do you have articles without me, Michael?
Nope.
Yes. You have papers without me.
I haven't been to Congress without you.
One way I know this is that our H indexes are different. And I'm pretty sure you published before I did, so you did it first.
To be fair, I did write some papers before I met you
You mean in the before times?
in the before times.
I don't see why that's an excuse.
I'm not making it an excuse. I'm just pointing out, I don't know, math.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, if you cared, Michael, you'd clearly invent a time machine.
So here's the thing. I want to apologize for the big delay between episode 0 and episode 1.
Okay.
I was trying to get, network approval from the suits.
You were trying to get network approval from the suits?
Because our to keep our show on the air.
Okay. Did it work?
Right, hang on, we're getting audio issues during the recording.
I hope you're going to keep this in.
I am not going to keep this in.
You got to. It's a requirement. You should make it. It should be in the extras.
Anyway.
Also, by the way, it's just a piece of long-term advice. Referring to your wife as audio issues, not a good long-term
I
strategy.
do feel like that will come to bite me in the end. So, did you get a chance to watch episode 2 of WestWorld?
I did, in fact, watch episode 2 of WestWorld. And for the purposes of this discussion, let's say it happened last night.
Did you like it?
I liked it quite a bit. I actually liked the second episode more than the first episode in some ways. Not that I thought it was better, but just that it did something I wasn't expecting it to do, which is it made a very quick leap into, let's call it the technical world building, and jumped very quickly to the point of what the issues are. I mean, the issues were kind of obvious from the first episode, but from a kind of ethical / technical point of view, the second episode just goes right there very quickly.
Well, then maybe I can do a recap of some of the things going on, and you can use that as a jumping off point to mention some of these technical.
Okay. I like that. I like when you summarize.
So they opened up on Dolores again, which is really cool. And you know what? I had a thought once because I think at the moment she's basically the only character whose name I've been consistently remembering. So I think I probably should make kind of a list for the future.
Well, you're one up on me because I'm not even sure who Dolores is.
Oh, for real?
I mean, I just don't associate names with people.
She's the daughter who lives in the farmhouse who keeps dropping a can on the ground. She's kind of the.
No, she's the original.
But it struck me. Do you know what Dolores means in Spanish?
Tell me.
Pain.
Oh, of course it does. Dolores. Sure.
Dolores. Which is interesting, right? Because her suffering is really central to the whole arc here. I thought I'd organize the summary around the characters. And so there's a bunch of characters that we can check in on who we were introduced to last time. But there were 2 new characters who seemed like they might be important that arrived from the outside world. And we saw them actually arriving in what looked like, to me, a super modernized DC airport. There's 2 guys that work together. One guy is clearly, I'm going to say, an a-hole. And he says that WestWorld shows who you really are. And the other one maybe is like a decent human being. And I think they show that to us because first of all, he keeps turning the women down for sex. But second of all,
like all decent human beings.
I do think that's what they're trying to convey, though. He's not sort of succumbing to this idea of like, things don't count here.
Right.
And he chooses, he's given a choice of hats, like cowboy hats. And there's like, I thought it was the white hats and the black hats, and he chose a white hat.
Right. Because subtlety matters.
Yeah, that wasn't super subtle, but I don't know. I like the feel of that scene where he's getting dressed and stuff. It's like, Oh yeah, that's probably how it is if you're like a rich person.
Yes, that's exactly what the Delta Lounge is like.
Is that right? Okay,
Yeah,
because I
you
was
go
going
there
to
and
ask you
people
that
just,
question.
ask you if you want to change clothes. It's pretty impressive.
That's fantastic. Okay, so yeah, they were clearly being pampered. All right, so then, and I'm going to start writing down their names, but there's the person I'm going to call the junior programmer, who I remember as one of the main characters in Raising Hope. She starts to express concern that there's a problem and that that problem could be contagious, and she right away backpedals, like, in a manner of speaking. But there's clearly some kind of contagion going on.
A virus.
A virus, yeah, and it's not a virus like a biological virus. It's an information virus.
Right. Well, what's the difference?
Well, so that's what Dawkins says, right? So Dawkins makes this connection between genes, which are these kind of biochemical replicators, and
Yeah.
replicators in information space, which he called,
Fred?
no, he called them memes, which now
Oh,
is a meme itself, right? So
yes.
people on the internet use the phrase meme to mean basically like a thing that people share with each other. But originally, it was this sort of idea of a little chunk of information that tends to self-replicate, that people tend to spread from person to person to person.
As a culture, we've weaponized memes, which is an expression that I both really appreciate and find irritating at the same time. And this whole episode is an example of weaponizing a meme. I like that.
What do you think the meme is?
They say a specific thing. There's
Yeah.
a specific thing that transfers the virus, the meme, the
And that seems to be these violent delights have violent ends.
right, which is quite on the nose as well. But what's really being spread is, besides that specific idea, that you have memories. There are things that have happened to you do not remember. And that is what's getting spread, sort of unlocking the key.
I see. I see. So there's a particular phrase, a little bit of language that seems to unlock the idea of being able to retain information from kind of previous episodes, previous parts of the world.
Right. And in fact, that's sort of the point. I mean, they really talk about this, right? There are two things about that I think are important. One is well, dreams are really just memories, which is true. I rarely remember my dreams. I know we dream every night. I don't remember them, but when I do remember them, they're weird kind of mishmashes of two or three things that have happened to me in the last day or so. And it feels as if my brain is trying to create some kind of narrative structure to connect them, which I presume has something to do with indexing long-term memory. Because
it's a giant data structure, right? And
right.
it's just self-organizing data structure.
Yeah, and you're trying to connect, and you're connecting things, and which explains why I have this habit of like hopping off on different stories every time, because they're all connected. Associative memory, AI, cognitive science, et cetera, et cetera. So there's sort of that, but there's also this thing that we kind of knew from the first episode that comes out here, which is programming happens through voice, through discussion, right? It's I program you by talking to you, and how could that possibly go wrong? Apparently, the way it can go wrong is someone could make a tiny little phrase, a little couplet at you, and it unlocks your memories, and you go insane, and then presumably, eventually, something terrible happens.
I think there's two really deep connections between programming and language that are worth mentioning here. So one is the idea that if you look at computer programs, they are a linguistic kind of structure, right? They're not a spatial structure for the most part. They're not a numerical structure. They're linguistic. There's phrases and there's words, and they get sequenced a certain way, and that's how you build up a program. It really is a kind of language, and in particular, one of the characters refers to this in a way that I thought was very poetic. We practice witchcraft, he said, the programmers. We speak the right words and we create life itself out of chaos. And, I don't usually think when I'm programming in that way, but it really resonated with me as what I'm doing when I'm programming. I'm using words to create worlds.
So you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of a line from a comic book I like. I think this particular one was Books of Magic, where someone says, science is a way of talking about the universe, and magic is a way of speaking to the universe that it cannot ignore. That actually connects, at least for me, with what you just said, right? That you're basically performing witchcraft, right? You're speaking in a way that cannot be ignored.
And the Hopkins character, again, whose name I should probably remember,
Hannibal. I think it's Hannibal.
he says, everything in this world is magic except to the magician.
That is very much the way we tend to think about programming. People who don't do programming tend to think about programming. And in fact, the people who do programming tend to think about programming. Except I normally hear it heard not as being a magician and magic, but being like a priest.
Or wizard.
Or a wizard who holds the knowledge
Yeah.
that others do not have. And because you have the secret book, you're able to do things. And it gives you a kind of power. And people do treat a lot of, what I found, at least in my early days, is people would treat a lot of what we did as magic, and they would be both impressed and terrified by it on the one hand, but also disdainful.
The movie Matrix gets into this too, where the programmer is the one who can actually get into reality and modify reality, and that's like a skill you have when you can program the world that you're in.
So as a technical matter, they're connecting programming, which of course, once you have, Turing complete programming languages, then you have viruses, you have things that can go wrong, you have bugs. And in fact, the way they debug the robots here, really interesting, because there's the whole time I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what are they teaching people about software engineering in this future?
Can you summarize quickly what software engineering means to you?
Yes, it is. Software engineering is a set of processes and methodologies designed to allow you to methodically build software systems in such a way that you actually understand what's happening and you get the result that you intend. And there's lots of things that go into that. It's not just, commenting is important or indentation is important, although that is a part of it because it helps to document what you're doing. It's a whole set of things so that you can understand 10 years from now what your program actually does, and so that at the time that you build it, you are making it do the things you actually intended to do.
All right, and you can contrast this with kind of more seat of the pants, throw things against the wall, see what sticks, move fast, break things, right? This sort of idea that you don't have any way to predict whether this is going to be okay or not, so you just have to try it.
What's the biggest thing you have to worry about when you're doing science, right? It's confirmation bias, right? That you only check to see what you're doing gets the result that you want, as opposed to checking to see if the thing you're doing also has all these other effects you've never thought about, right? It's a way of kind of, in the context of programming, basically doing a kind of scientific method to make certain that you actually don't just know the positives, you know the negatives. You don't just get the false positives, you get the false negatives. Like you really get the entire space instead of half the space, which is what, as human beings, we will just do. We don't think about it, right? You go, oh, well, I've written this thing that allowed me to do X. Well, it also turns out it allows you to do Y, and Y is very bad. And just asking the question, how do I test and get the boundaries of what's happening, is an important set of skills. And most of us don't worry about it. And the truth is, most of the time, even when we're wrong, it's okay, because it's never going to be used in any way that matters. It's never going to be deployed. But once you're going to deploy it in the real world, you have to do testing. You have to think through about what the boundaries are, what the edge cases are, what the mistakes can be. Because otherwise, what are you going to do? You're going to build like intelligent robots that retain memories of everything that's ever happened to them and then eventually go insane. And why would you ever want that?
And threaten everybody. Yeah. So presumably this is going to come back to bite everybody. Yeah, it changes everything and it moves them. I mean, that's the thing that's so surprising to me, is that it moves them from objects to beings, right? Just having that thread of memory that cuts across these multiple episodes makes them beings. And now they're beings, and now you want to give them rights, not torture them.
I mean, that would be nice.
I want to make another connection between programming and language that I have learned from Dave Ackley, one of my first mentors and co-host of a podcast that I do.
Yeah, he's the one that you normally cheat on me with.
Something like that. His perspective, his philosophy is that language is programming. Language, when we talk to each other, we are programming each other. We are opening our mind up for influence from these external forces. Now, we have various kinds of filters and things to try to keep us from just being completely dictated to. But nonetheless, by listening to the words that you speak, it's changing me and it's changing how I think. And it gives you an opportunity to manipulate me. And we're constantly programming each other.
As you know, Michael, because we share a paper on this, this idea of being able to influence people through asking the right question or making the right kind of suggestion is actually pretty powerful. Because it isn't, as you say, it isn't just a metaphor. It is a reality. right? I mean, even if you don't want to buy that, you think the influence thing goes too far. Well, in some sense, using the right words to get people to behave in a certain way, the way that marketeers do, for example, that's exploiting a weakness in our operating system.
I was complaining last time that they were debugging without a screen, and I thought that was really crazy. Why would anyone ever do that? But the junior programmer has glasses on when she's doing her debugging, and she can read text off the glasses. So she has a screen. It's just not the boring kind of screens that we have.
Which reminds me of a comment that I found a little strange, which was, oh, let's, up her aggression by 15% or whatever. What does that even mean?
When I was a grad student at CMU, I worked in a group, Joe Bates's group, and he created woggles. And woggles were these little artificial beings that kind of moved around in a terrarium, kind of artificial terrarium, and they interacted with each other. And they were sort of based on cats indirectly, but they were little blobby things. They're very cute. And their behavior was controlled by a set of kind of slider knobs that were things like, how curious is this one? How aggressive is this one? How sleepy is this one? And their drives would kind of wax and wane over time, but within the bounds that are set, these numeric bounds that were set. And by tweaking them, by making an agent a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more curious or inquisitive, you get sort of interesting interactions between the agents, and you get, storytelling to happen.
I mean, you could implement this as rewards. You could implement this as complicated if-then statements. It could be an equation where you just add numbers together with different coefficients. Or it really could be probabilities of, like, if you're aggressive, how often is it the case that the aggression thing, whatever the aggression thing wants to do, wins? By the way, why don't they make it so it's impossible for them to remember? Like why don't you just genuinely reboot memory? Like, why don't you set memory over here and control over here, and then just erase memory every day so it's not possible?
So they kind of address this maybe indirectly, where Bernard, who I think is like the head programmer, is talking to his boss, maybe like a manager who he's maybe also sleeping with. And she says, why do they talk to each other when there's no guests around? Why do the hosts, the robots, talk to each other? And he said, they're essentially, they're practicing, right? They're learning how to get more natural and how to handle different kinds of situations. And so there's a tension, right, between learning to get better at the kind of day-to-day interactions and remembering actual events that happen. They're not clearly separable.
So this is like a giant neural network where the weights represent the current state, and we act as if those weights are, a sufficient statistic of all of history, right? And it doesn't matter how you got there, you're there, right? But what if by looking at the weights, you could recover actual memories of how you got there? Then, so is that kind of the metaphor here, that they're practicing because it updates their weights, but you could actually look at the weights and reconstruct how those weights came to be? And
there's some kind of echo of the events that caused them to learn that way. And there's some research in neural networks of being able to recover actual training instances from the weights of a neural network, not just the overall rule that is learned, but the specific things that were used to train it. So the man in black comes back, and he specifically to interrupt a hanging. And he shows the guy who he rescues the maze. He drags that guy back to his home. The staff notices this happening. So remember, before we seem to think that nobody noticed this guy, but they actually know that he's there. And they say, should we slow him down? Should we stop him? And one of the staff members says, no, he gets whatever he wants, which is unexplained. Like, we don't know why this guy has a special status. He says, in a sense, I was born here. So maybe he's a robot? He ends up killing everybody in the hometown that he goes back to, trying to get people to tell him about the maze. Right. And finally, the condemned man's daughter ends up breaking character and tells the man in black how to get to the opening of the maze.
Right. By the way, there's a couple of things there. So one, I may regret this, and if I'm proven to be wrong later, which other people know, but we don't because we've only watched 2 episodes, you can just go back and edit it. So I never said this. But I think, in a sense, I was born here is supposed to mean, or you're supposed to infer from it, this is where you learn who you really are.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
I'll
so
accept
I
that.
became who I really am here. By the way, this whole there's a deeper game here, and I want to know what that deeper game is. I mean, he says that like 47 times. Like that has to matter. It better not. They better explain this at some point. There better be something
Oh,
more.
absolutely. That's they're building up to it. But and I can't tell whether it's something secret that people aren't supposed to find out about, or it's like an Easter egg. It's like when people make video games, they will sometimes include extra bits of gameplay that aren't really the main game. But if you're really dedicated to playing the game, you can start to find these little hidden gems.
He represents the bro gaming culture, and I'm bored with this game because I've beaten it. I will now want to create a new game,
Hmm.
independent of what the game is supposed to be, right? And so I just refused. I refuse to suspend disbelief. I'm just going to kill people and do whatever I want. Except there is actual interesting stuff going on here that you're hoping to learn from this thing. He says a couple things that are interesting, right? One is he says, "I thought I knew everything about you, but I never knew you had a family."
Hmm.
That's kind of deep. The other thing is, and I think this is a powerful moment, at least it was for me, is when she breaks character,
Hmm.
right? Because they're unaware, they are unaware that they are robots, right? It's not like they're robots and they're acting. They're unaware of it, whatever that means. And he says the right thing. And I don't know whether he triggers something that makes her break character or if the staff is doing, I don't know how it works, but the maze is not meant for you. Anyway, don't you think I think this was a better episode than the first episode.
It definitely left me more creeped out. Well, okay, so let's switch over to Dolores for a second, because it seems as though Bernard and Dolores have some kind of secret thing going on where he brings her into the lab and queries her about what's actually going on.
Yeah, I was worried that I had fallen asleep or something and missed like 3 minutes worth of conversation somehow, because it feels like we come in the middle of that conversation or towards the end of that conversation, and he just reveals that he's learning so much by talking to her and whatever, which suggests that the whole reverie thing might be a problem, but it may not actually be the catalyst of what's going on here.
Mm.
Right? It's something that Commissioner Gordon is doing. I now can't not think of him as Commissioner Gordon.
Well, he asked Dolores, has anyone updated your core heuristics in that time? Which that was an interesting insight into how they're thinking about programming the hosts.
Yeah, and she says no. And my question is she lying or is she unaware?
Yeah, I can't tell. She asks him, "Hey, wait, have you done something wrong?" Which is really interesting, and he reacts by erasing her event log, which is a thing we put in programs all the time.
Right.
And he also says resume a lot, which is a thing that when you're debugging at a really low level, you end up stepping through the individual statements of a program, and when you want it to move on to the next one, you say something like resume.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole lot of programming going on here.
So the last little bit of story I wanted to bring back is there's another arc going on, which is that they're introducing a new storyline into the park.
Yeah, I like that. But actually, the thing that I liked the most was when he said, "Was there nothing you liked about it?" And I was thinking, oh, look, it's everybody who ever writes anything on the internet having to deal with comment sections.
Well, did you see the thing that he liked?
I don't remember. What did he like?
The boots. One of the characters was wearing boots, and he pointed
yeah,
to those
yeah,
boots. So then in the next scene, he's got those boots.
I mean, it's just funny. Like the writers we were getting insight into the actual writers of the show right there. All right. Is there anything else we need to cover, Michael?
Nope.
All right. Well, then I'm happy, and I look forward to seeing how you edit this.